Okay, we are on the record, and this is People of the State of Michigan versus Jacob Guild, docket number 17-851FH. This is the time set for a hearing on a evidentiary hearing on a probation violation allegation. And Mr. Guild is present in the courtroom per his request with counsel, Mr. Austin. And the last time we were on the record together, Mr. Guild, through his attorney, consented to having the agent and the assistant prosecutor appear remotely. And is everyone ready to proceed? Mr. Austin, you're okay?
We're ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Ms. Allen, you're all set?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, then you may call your witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The people call Agent Jason Spear.
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Sir, can you please state and spell your name for the record?
Jason Spear, Jason, and Spear.
Sir, where do you work?
Ingham County Probation.
And in what capacity do you work for Ingham County Probation?
I have a caseload of sex offenders or cases that have a sexual component or a history thereof. Something in their history may have popped up as a sex offender.
And can you describe your duties as a probation agent?
Yep. I supervise a caseload of maybe about 50 to 55 probationers in a capacity that supervises them in the community.
And by supervise, do you mean that you are in charge of making sure they follow the conditions of probation and that they're checking in with you?
Yes, the probation order of probation as given by the judge is enforced by me. Lower level violations, I try not to burden the court with. Some days it goes beyond that and then it ends up in a court like today.
Let's talk about that order of probation. Is that a standard order that comes with every person that's on probation?
I've never seen it without that condition.
Okay. And have you supervised somebody by the name of Jacob Guild?
Yes.
Do you remember when that supervision began?
Yes, I remember it because I took over the caseload for Taylor Israel, and the date the case was transferred to me was December 21st, 2018.
And as part of the supervision that Mr. Guild was on, did he have an order of probation as well?
He did.
And how, I know that you didn't start as his agent initially, but were you aware as to whether he had received a list of the conditions of probation through that probation order?
I looked into the case notes and I see on July 6th, 2018, he had an orientation. And if you write that case note, it's that you go through a checklist that the state provides for us. The number one checklist on that's MDOC form is to orient the probationer to the order of probation.
Okay. And on the order of probation, is one of the requirements that while on probation, Mr. Guild not exhibit any assaultive, threatening, or intimidating behavior?
Yes, 4.22.
And was one of those requirements you have no contact with known felons?
Yes.
And was third of one of those requirements that he comply with written and verbal orders from his agent?
Yes.
Now, during the course of your supervision with Mr. Guild, did there come a time in June of this year where he notified you he had been assaulted by someone by the name of Alexandra Moffitt?
He didn't mention her name at the time, but after receiving the Owasso, or I can't recall if it was, I believe it was a Owasso police report that said that he had contact with a person and he was the victim. So it all checked out to me. I didn't know that that person that assaulted him at that point was a known felon.
But after you learned about this contact with police back in June, did you, as a result, give Mr. Guild a new verbal order on July 1st, 2020?
Yes, and the reason I do that is because when I was in parole, I had a caseload of domestic violence abusers, and I see it a lot that they twist around their contact sometimes to be viewed as the victim in these cases. So me and almost everybody else in the parole office, as well as probation, always give a verbal order to have no contact with that person, even if he is the victim. I believe that there's no reason to have any contact with that person. And I told him, since he had a lease with that person, a leased vehicle, to go through the courts and follow a path that's legal without contact with that person.
And was that person Alexandra Moffitt?
At that point that I gave that order, it was on the police report, it's Alejandra English.
Okay, and is that the same person that you now know as to be Alexandra Moffitt?
After talking with her agent in our probation department, she says that her driver's license has her maiden name and it's English, or
Okay.
possibly a married name and she's no longer with that person. Either way, she goes by Moffitt, but her ID says English.
Okay. And so on July 1st, 2020, you gave Mr. Guild a verbal order that he's to have no contact with this person, whether it be English or Moffitt, correct?
Yes, and I gave him the benefit of the doubt when he told me that he was the victim. And I didn't get the police report until several days later, but it was just prior to our next report day, which was July 1st, 2020, and that's when I gave him that order.
And how was it that you gave him the order? Were you in person? I assume not because of the pandemic. How was it that you communicated the order?
Over Google Duo.
And did he acknowledge this new order that you had given him at the time?
Yes, he kind of threw a fit about it because he has this lease and said, well, how am I supposed to have no contact with the person I have a lease with? And I said to go through legally through the courts.
And at the time you said you didn't have knowledge of Ms. English or Ms. Moffitt's status as a felon. Did you later learn that she has a status as a felon?
Yes, when the case for Ms. Moffitt is supervised in Shiawassee County, and that agent notified me that there was contact with her probationer that included my probationer, and that was the first hint that the person he had been having contact with was a felon.
And back in June, you did not bring this forward as a violation. It wasn't until a later contact that this happened, correct?
He was a victim, and it checked out as a victim. There was no reason for violation at that time. I wasn't even aware that Ms. Moffitt was a felon at that point.
Were you notified again of police contact with Mr. Guild and the Owasso Police Department in September of this year?
Yes, by that agent originally that's supervising Ms. Moffitt.
And did you receive a police report that detailed the police contact?
Yes.
Was that report dated September 24th, 2020?
Yes.
Can you describe what the police report says in terms of why police were dispatched that day?
Yes. There was a call for service to that location where two people were fighting inside of a vehicle at, I believe, a McDonald's.
And did police arrive and make contact with those two people?
Yes,
And were those two people Miss Moffitt or English and Mr. Guild?
yes,
And was that at 601 West Main Street?
yes.
Were you aware of whether police interviewed Mr. Guild at that time?
They did.
And do you recall what statement he gave?
Well, he started off with saying that she assaulted him back in June and was trying to get money from her for medical bills incurred by that assault, as well as payment on the Traverse that they leased together, as well as some information that came from his statement saying that she assaulted me, and he said that he didn't assault her.
And did the police officers interview Miss Moffitt as well?
Yes,
And do you recall what her statement was as to what had occurred that day?
yes, that he took the keys out of the ignition or from her person and was taking possession of the vehicle, and that's when they were fighting. She claimed that outside of the vehicle that he pinned her against the door jamb and forced the keys out of her hand.
And do you recall if police followed up with Mr. Guild about her statement regarding him grabbing her and pinning her against the car?
I did email, and the prosecutor didn't pick up the charges. That's the only information that I got from after that time.
Okay, so based on the information that police were dispatched to a couple fighting, Miss Moffitt was identified, and based on the differing statements between Mr. Guild and Miss Moffitt, that there was a dispute and physical interaction between the two of them about the vehicle, you brought forth these probation violations, correct?
That's correct.
And Agent Spear, even if we're unable to tell based on the differing statements as to maybe who was the aggressor, did you feel that this still resulted in probation violation, and can you explain why?
My personal experience dealing with domestic abusers, I see this all the time where the probationer with domestic violence charges blows up your phone with every bit of evidence they can find that can get them out of this type of situation that they're in. That's the first red flag that I generally see. I must have 50 texts from him with pictures. I mean, anything that he can mold to better his story generally. So I use that experience where I generally see that sort of panic in these kind of cases by the abuser to try to control the situation.
And even to the extent there was any sort of even if it was mutual in any sort of way, would that still be a violation of assaultive, threatening, or intimidating behavior?
Yes. He's not allowed. And when I take over a case, Your Honor, and prosecutor, when I take over a case, I reiterate the main points of the probation order. If I see them, I even tell them halfway through and 3/4 of the way through. You know, a lot of probationers get real too comfortable on probation for your own good. You know, protect yourself and be, cognizant of the situations you put yourself into. And he keeps getting into these situations. A year ago, it was Heather Corkwell that he was stalking and had charges out of Mason. He had a case in Eaton County just at the same time as sentencing for this case. This case is a situation where he was trying to control a girlfriend. You know, everything about him is to control. if he loses that control, he can be very dangerous.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Austin?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Agent Spare. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
So I understand that you gave Mr. Guild this verbal order to stay away from this person on July 1st. Is that right?
Yes, as I do every person that is a victim of a domestic violence attack.
And you said that was after Mr. Guild had reported to you that this person had assaulted him. Is that right?
Yes.
And was there any follow-up in writing as regards to that order, or was it just strictly a verbal order?
It was a verbal order strictly because I gave him the benefit of the doubt that he was a victim and it checked out. However, in the back of my mind, I'm still thinking, why is he a victim? Why is he putting himself in these types of situations?
Well, my question was, did it just remain a verbal order? And so the answer is it was never reduced to writing. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you said Miss English or Miss Moffitt is being supervised in Shiawassee County. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you made reference to her probation agent. Do you recall the name of that agent?
I believe Kunick, and the case just got transferred to another agent in their office. But she was the main point that got a hold of me.
Okay. And in directing your attention to this latest incident, the September 24th incident, and is the information that you're essentially relying on for that the police report that was made?
For the one charge or the verbal
September
order that I gave?
24th incident.
For the one charge, yes.
And when you say the one charge, you're referring to the assaultive, abusive, threatening, and intimidating behavior?
Yes.
And so the information that you received regarding that incident was solely contained in that police report, is that correct?
Yes.
And so you never personally spoke to Ms. Moffitt regarding that incident?
No. She wasn't accepting any calls.
Does that mean you attempted to call her and you were unsuccessful?
I talked to her sentencing agent, and she had made several attempts to get a hold of her and was unsuccessful.
But you never made any attempts, is that right?
I did. I talked to the person that wrote the bench warrant to get her into custody. Typically, when another probationer is under bench warrant status, you don't make any attempts to call them directly. You have the sentencing agent coordinate everything so that there's no tip-off that they also are looking at charges.
And in that report, Mr. Guild denied assaulting Ms. Moffitt, is that correct?
Yes.
And you essentially talked about your experience working with domestic abusers, and it sounds like you were basing your conclusion on whether or not Mr. Guild was guilty of assaulting, intimidating, or threatening Ms. Moffitt based on your prior experience with domestic abusers. Is that right?
No, not at all. That is based on my experience was brought up so I could let you know that the history of my caseloads, the domestic abusers, I always gave a verbal warning, even if they were the victim.
And in the police report regarding the September 24th incident, it references that the police took photographs of Mr. Guild's face. Is that right?
Yes.
And the report indicated that there was some type of redness on his face, I believe particularly his nose. Is that correct?
I'm sure it does say that.
And the police did that because Mr. Guild said that it was actually Miss Moffitt that had assaulted him. Is that right?
That's what he said, yes.
And there was no mention in the police report that the police took photographs of Miss Moffitt. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if they did or not, to tell you the truth. I know that he was the suspect and she was the victim. And I didn't remember them mentioning anything about victim pictures.
If the police had taken photographs of Miss Moffitt and mentioned it in a report, that's something you would recall. Is that right?
I don't recall.
Is it accurate that the police report did not mention any visible signs of injuries on Miss Moffitt?
I will need to glance at it really quick here. You're correct, it doesn't mention it.
And you said you've been in contact with the Shiawassee County Prosecutor's Office regarding the September 24th incident. Is that correct?
Yes,
And no charges are forthcoming against Mr. Guild for this incident. Is that right?
yes. But I just got an email
And-
from them mentioning that they might be looking into it again.
As of now, no charges have been filed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you have any follow-up discussions with Mr. Guild regarding this September 24th incident?
I haven't talked to him since he went in to jail.
Were you aware that he filed a personal protection order against Ms. Moffitt on September the 25th regarding the September 24th incident?
That sounds typical of him, yes.
So would that be, yes, you were aware of that?
No, it sounds like something he would do, yes. But I'm not aware that he did it.
And if somebody was assaulted by somebody, you would advise a probationer to seek that type of protection. Would that be a fair statement?
If I believed him, yes. There was plenty of opportunity for him to walk out of the car. I believe,
Well,
from what I saw, that he
thank you,
allowed
Agent
himself
Spear.
to be.
You've answered my question. And if Mr. Guild was lawfully defending himself against somebody aggressing against him, that would not be abusive or threatening behavior. Is that right?
It would be if he just left the area, but he turned back and pinned her against a car to force the keys out of her hand.
That's not my question, sir. If he was defending himself against somebody attacking him, you would not violate such a person for engaging in abusive or threatening behavior if they were defending themselves against somebody attacking them. Is that right?
Like the other incident, yes, in June, that's exactly right. The September incident is totally different.
And as far as you're aware, regarding the September 24th incident, other than Mr. Guild and Ms. Moffitt, there were no other witnesses to this occurrence. Is that right?
There's no mention of it in there, but I'm curious if the people at McDonald's that called the police, I'm not sure.
Well, there's no mention of any other witnesses in the report. Would that be a fair statement?
That's fair.
And there were no other witness statements in the report other than Ms. Moffitt and Mr. Guild. Is that right?
Correct.
And you have not heard from any other witnesses who claim to have seen this event. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Redirect, Ms. Allen?
Thank you, Your Honor. Agent Spear, can you make the police report available to review for yourself real quick? Because I want to make sure we are clear as to the defendant's statements, since there's been mention of the PPO here. So drawing your attention to page 2 of the report where the officer says contact with Jacob. In that section of the report, defendant admits that he goes to make contact with Ms. Moffitt, correct? To clarify, on the date of September 24th, he tells police he drove to her apartment, correct?
Yes.
And then he says they were discussing how she was going to help pay for his bills when she doesn't have any money, correct?
Yes.
And then he tells police he began going through her planner and she got upset, correct?
That's correct.
And then she grabbed the key out of the ignition and got out of the vehicle and began walking away, correct?
Yes.
And then defendant admitted to the police that he ran after her and said he was trying to get his belongings back from her, correct?
Yes.
And then he said this is when she struck him in the face, correct?
That's correct.
So based on his statement that he went to go see her, and then when she left the vehicle, he chased after her to get his own property back. What did you, based on her statement, what did you put together that meant he was trying to get the keys from her?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. And when she made a statement to the police saying that he was physical with her, can you please look down at page 3 of 3 where it says contact with Jacob, where the officer asked Mr. Guild why he grabbed her by the arm and pinned her against the car. He responded he didn't, but he did admit he was trying to get his key back, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I caught that. He told the police that he did do that, but it was for the purpose of getting the key back? Is that what you said, or no?
He denied the assault, Mr. Spear, correct, but that he did admit he was just trying to get his key back, correct?
Yes.
So he denied pinning her against the car?
Yes.
Am I right about that? Okay, thank you. Redirect, Mr. Austin?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Okay, then do you have any other witnesses, Ms. Allen?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Witnesses for you, Mr. Austin?
Call Mr. Guild, Your Honor.
Mr. Guild, could you step up to this chair over here?
Sure, Your Honor. Which way would you like me to go?
Just around there.
Okay. This chair right here?
Yes, sir. And before you take your seat there, would you raise your right hand? Best you can. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Please have a seat. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Austin.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Guild, could I have you state your full name, spell your last name for the record, please?
Jacob Guild, Jacobguild.
Thank you. And you're currently under supervision with this court on probation, correct?
Yes.
And are you familiar with what is expected of you on probation?
Yes.
And Mr. Spear is the one currently supervising you, is that right?
Yes.
Now, I want to direct your attention back to July 1st of this year. Did you hear Mr. Spear testify that he gave you an order not to have any contact with someone either by the name of Alejandra English or Alexandra Moffitt?
I do not recall.
Okay. And did you hear him testify to that?
Yes. On Zoom.
Do you recall such a statement or an order from him?
No.
And if you had received an order from him, would you have done your best to comply and obey that order?
Yes. Especially from Mr. Spear.
Yes. And who is Alexandra Moffitt to you?
A friend of mine, we've been friends for almost 2 years.
Okay. And did there come a time either in June or July that you reported an incident between you and Ms. Moffitt to Agent Spear?
Yes, June 21st.
What was the nature of that?
To where she assaulted me.
And were you aware that Ms. Moffitt had a felony conviction?
No.
Did she ever tell you that she had a felony conviction?
No.
Did you ever accompany her to a meeting with a probation officer?
No.
Were you ever present in court where you witnessed her being convicted of a crime?
No.
And now I want to direct your attention to September the 24th of this year, last month. Was there an incident that happened between you and Ms. Moffitt?
Yeah.
And can you just kind of briefly describe what that was, what happened?
The events of that day.
The incident that we're talking about as it relates to the violation.
Yeah. She asked me to come to her apartment so we can talk about the car lease. We then drove to a Wassel McDonald's, sat in the parking lot for about 17 to 20 minutes, to where we discussed I need the car back because she wasn't making payments on the vehicle. She was 2-3 months behind, and I didn't want to repossession on my record, so I asked her if I can then obtain the vehicle back that night. She threatened me and said, no, you don't deserve to have this vehicle. I've been making most of the payments on it. And so when I asked her, I need this vehicle back, she then attempted to have I'd say more of an aggressive tone, like louder tone, like some anger within her. So I asked her, well, can you be able to give any type of money to help go towards the car lease so it doesn't affect our credit? And she said, well, if I had my planner in the car, I would be able to show you when I would get paid and we can figure something out. So I then look around the car and I find her planner and she says, oh, well, I didn't know that I even had it in the car. And I said, okay, well, can we discuss a date to where you can give money for payments? And she then discussed a later date of about a week or 2 weeks later, somewhere around the 12th or 13th of each month. And I said, okay, well, that should be able to work, but we're so far behind in the car bills that they're gonna take this car because it's been about 3 months at this point to where she's not paying the car. So she got mad and forcibly took her planner back out of my hand and then hit me in the arm again about 2-3 times. I had to hold her back against her chest area, not pin her or anything, just hold her back because she assaulted me twice at that point. She then grabbed the key out of the ignition and walked away along with my cell phone. So I walked after her to grab my key and cell phone back. We get into the car. I say, okay, well, then at least let me get gas at Speedway. And and drive me back home to where my car was at. We pull out of McDonald's, a Wausau right there, make it about 5-10 seconds where we're pulled over by a Wausau Police Department. They ask what happened, they search me, ask if I have any weapons or anything, I tell them no. I tell them instantly that I've been assaulted again, I've been assaulted by her in the past from June. They then ask Ms. Moffitt or English some questions. They then tell me to take the car and go continue to get gas at Speedway and that they would take her home.
Let me stop you there for a second, Mr. Gill. You talked about earlier that she started punching or hitting you.
Yes.
Is that right? Can you describe what that was? Was that with a closed fist? Was that with an open hand? What was that?
A closed fist?
Okay. And you said that happened multiple times?
Yes, about 2-3 times.
Where did she hit you at?
My arm.
And when that happened, did you retaliate by punching her?
No.
And did you slap her?
No.
Did you kick her?
No.
Did you shove her?
No.
Did you threaten her with a weapon?
No.
Did you threaten her with some type of harm or violence?
No.
And I believe you said you made reference to grabbing her in some way.
Yes.
And again, what was that in response to?
Just to try to get the car key back.
Okay.
And my belongings.
I'm sorry, you grabbed her to try and get the car key back?
Yes, the car key and my belongings. Then she presumptively hit me in the face twice. So 2 times in the vehicle and 2 times out on the street.
Where did she hit you in the face?
About the left cheek and nose area.
And was that with a closed fist or an open hand?
Closed fist.
And at that point, did you punch her back?
No.
And would you have done anything physically at all to her had she not taken the property?
No.
And the best that you recall, did you have any kind of markings on your face from her striking you?
Did I have markings?
Yes.
Yes.
Was that on your face or somewhere else?
My face.
Did the police take note of that, or do you know?
I'm not sure if they took note of that in the police report, but later that night, I went back to the Wausau Police Department, and I forgot the sergeant's name, but he took pictures of my face.
Do you recall seeing any kind of markings at all on Miss Moffitt?
No.
Any type of bruising?
No.
Did you have any kind of weapons on you at that time?
No.
Did you seek any type of protection from the courts at all after this September 24th incident?
Yes.
What was that?
I filed a PPO against her.
When did you do that?
September 25th.
The next day?
Yes.
Where did you file that at?
Through here. Through
Ingham County Court?
Yes.
And was that stemming from the September 24th incident or another one?
I would say from both incidents because it just kept getting worse and worse. Progressed over time.
And was that granted or denied, or do you know?
It was granted.
Thank you, Mr. Guild. The prosecutor may have some questions for you, okay?
Okay.
Ms. Allen?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Guild, you believe that back in June, you were the victim of Ms. Moffitt, correct?
Yes.
And you had a conversation with Agent Spear about that incident, correct?
Yes.
And at that time, he ordered you to have no contact with Ms. Moffitt, correct?
I do not recall.
Do you recall that he told you you should go through the court system if you had an issue or a dispute over the vehicle?
No.
What did he say then about your incident with Ms. Moffitt?
He then asked me who assaulted me, and And then he thought that either I was dumb or that I was lying or just trying to cover myself. But at that time, it seemed like he didn't believe that I was a victim.
Did he advise you to go see her again?
No,
And you don't recall any conversation you had about the vehicle with him where he told you to go through the courts?
no, I do not recall.
Did you tell him why it was that you two were in a fight that day in June?
I do not recall that, of him saying of some type of command or,
No, is it, so when you told Mr. Spear about your issue with Miss Moffitt, did you tell him why you and Miss Moffitt got into an argument on that day?
I believe it was something over of a car lease.
And what did he tell you about the car lease issue?
I do not recall after that.
Okay, so you now recall that it was about the car lease. Is it the Traverse that we're talking about that was an issue in September, that same car lease?
I believe so.
So are you having trouble remembering?
It's been 4 or 5 months, so I would not lie and say yes, I am having trouble remembering.
So is it possible he did tell you to have no contact with her and you forgot?
It's possible.
Okay, and it's possible you had a discussion about him advising you to go through the court system for a dispute over the lease and you forgot?
Yes, that's possible.
So then in September of 2020, instead of going through the court system, you went to Miss Moffitt's apartment, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and you went there to confront her about money for medical bills and the lease, correct?
yes, to talk about it.
And you even found her own personal planner and you went through that planner to make sure you could find out when she might have some money, correct?
I did not go through it, but we discussed of if she had a later date when she could be able to make payments on the vehicle or for medical bills.
And you just testified a few minutes ago that you found the planner in the vehicle, correct?
Correct, but I did not go through it.
And she was upset that you took her planner, correct?
Yes,
And it's your testimony that she hit you and that you had to, in response, hold her arms down, correct?
yes,
And you didn't leave, correct?
no,
You didn't call the police, correct?
no,
Instead, she got upset and took the keys out, and you went after her to physically take them back, correct?
not physically, but just to grab the keys, yes.
How were you going to grab them from her if they were in her hand, sir, if it wasn't physically?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't understand the question, yes.
Okay. So what we have is back in June, you had an issue with this lease, and then you still came back in September to resolve this on your own instead of going through the courts, correct?
Yes,
And sir, you knew she was on probation for a felony, correct?
no, I did not.
You said you've been friends with her for 2 years and it never came up that she was on probation for a felony?
No, not once.
And when you were sharing you were sharing a vehicle with her and you had no knowledge that she was on felony probation at the time?
Yes, I did not know that she was on felony probation.
And when you found her planner, did you not see that she had probation appointments in that planner?
No, I did not see anything of that nature in her plan.
So this person you were sharing a vehicle with and friends with for 2 years, you had no knowledge that she had a criminal history, including being on currently felony probation?
Yes, I had no knowledge.
Okay. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect, Mr. Austin?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Gil, if you were aware that Agent Spear directed you not to have contact with Miss Moffitt, would you have obeyed that order?
Yes,
And when you went to see, when you were with Miss Moffitt on September the 24th, that was in Shiawassee County, is that right?
yes,
Were you living in Shiawassee County at the time, or were you living in Ingham County?
I was living in Ingham County.
And Did you go there for the purpose of assaulting her or harming her in some way?
No.
And again, how was it you got from Ingham County to Shiawassee County that day?
By car.
Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you. Mr. Guild, you can step down.
Thank you, John.
And any further witnesses, Mr. Austin?
No further proofs to present, Your Honor.
Okay, anything further from the people?
No, Your Honor.
All right, I'll hear your closing argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. I believe the proofs have come out exactly as Mr. Spear had indicated and testified, in that when he, in his experience supervising people like Mr. Guild, what we have here is back in June, allegedly Mr. Guild believed himself to be the victim of a domestic violence situation. Agent Spear specifically ordered him to have no contact with this person, giving him the benefit of the doubt that maybe he was the victim on this case. And the defendant had an issue with Ms. Moffitt over a lease that they were sharing. Instead of going through the courts, as Mr. Spear had indicated, what this defendant did is went to her apartment to confront her about money and this lease. And the reason I bring that aspect up is because what he's been purported to have violated is intimidating, assaultive, or threatening behavior. And when he goes to her place, he admits it's to confront her about money. And then they get in the vehicle and he gets upset because he wants money. And then he has her planner to find out when she's going to have money so that she can pay him. And it's about the issue with this lease, that he went there specifically for that purpose on that day. And when we look at whether that's intimidating behavior, he was specifically told not to. And the way that it was approached and the way that he says, well, she started to hit him, so he was forced to pin her arms down. He didn't leave. He didn't call the police. She got upset and took the key out and left. So he was forced to go after her, to physically take it back. That's not believable. What this was that he went there to get money, to get what he needed. And then when she didn't have what he wanted or do what he wanted, he physically decided to take the keys from her. And the police were called for a fight between two people, not for a woman beating up a man that they saw in the parking lot. So I think, Your Honor, for this, for that first issue, I think we have, looking at the context of everything that happened on between June and September, intimidating, threatening, or assaultive behavior. And then Mr. Spear said on July 1st, 2020, he specifically told the defendant to have no contact with her. And while testifying, the defendant admitted maybe he didn't remember that he was told that. Maybe he didn't remember their whole conversation about the lease and the best way to approach it. And I don't find that to be believable either. I think what we have is Agent Spear saying he always makes that sort of verbal order. And specifically, he gave detail as to the conversation. And I think we have enough evidence that that order was given. And then we have Ms. Moffitt or Ms. English, depending on her name, being on probation for a felony, to the extent that she was, the reason we even know about a lot of this is her own agent notified Mr. Spear. And it's not believable that the defendant has been friends with her for 2 years, has a vehicle with her, and has multiple contacts with her and does not know that she's on felony probation. And one of his terms is to not have contact with felons. And he purposely had 2 contacts with her, one in June, and then when he went back again in September. So we'd ask the court to find the defendant in violation of probation as requested. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Austin?
Thank you, Your Honor. Understanding, of course, that the standard is a preponderance of the evidence. Even that, Your Honor, I think they have failed on these counts. As it relates to the assaultive, threatening, abusive, or intimidating behavior, I don't believe that there's credible evidence to suggest that Mr. Guild did any of those things to Ms. Moffitt, either June or September or at any other time. Taking the September 24th incident, which gives rise to that particular violation. This is according to the police report. One, Mr. Guild denied ever assaulting Ms. Moffitt. The police took photographs of Mr. Gill, there were some type of markings on Mr. Gill's face which supports his testimony that Ms. Moffitt struck him in the face. There was no evidence presented to the contrary of that. There was no mention in the police report that there were any photographs taken of Ms. Moffitt. No mention in that report that there was any type of visible signs of injury, bruisings, or markings on Ms. Moffitt. And certainly the police would have done that if there was such evidence. Certainly Agent Spear would have recalled such evidence if there was any, but there wasn't any. And the reason for that is that because Mr. Gill is telling the truth in that he did not assault Ms. Moffitt, but she was the one that started getting physical and aggressive with him. And he did what he is allowed to do, and he did not exceed any force, beyond any force that was necessary to stop her from attacking him. He did not hit or strike her, and there was no evidence of that to the contrary. It was Mr. Gill who did the right thing very next day by doing what his agent directed him to do, which was seek protection from the courts. And that's what he did. And that was granted. And again, there's no evidence presented to the contrary. Ms. Moffitt was not here today to testify to any of these occurrences, so the court could perhaps weigh the credibility of both of the witnesses. All we have is the recitation of the facts presented in the police report and Mr. Gill's testimony. So I don't believe that they have met their burden as it results or as it relates to that count. Mr. Gill stated that he was not aware that Ms. Moffitt was a convicted felon. And again, there was no evidence presented to the contrary on that. They can't meet their burden by simply saying, well, she was a felon, she was on felony probation. It's not like a strict liability offense. He would have to willfully violate his probation by being aware or knowing that she was a convicted felon. Mr. Gill stated that he was not aware of that. And again, there was no evidence presented of that to the contrary. And I think Mr. Gill is being honest when he said perhaps Agent Spear could have given him such an order not to have further contact with Ms. Moffitt, and he doesn't remember. That's possible. And I can understand the court ruling against Mr. Gill on that. But again, I think Mr. Gill was clear. He does his best to abide by the terms and conditions of his probation. And in his mind, if he recalled such an order from Agent Spear, he would have followed it and obeyed it. I believe that gives credibility to Mr. Gill that when he says he does not recall Agent Spear giving him such an order, or else he would not have gone there. So I would ask the court to find Mr. Gill is not in violation on these three counts for the reasons that I've stated, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, the level of proof that's required for a probation violation is preponderance of the evidence. That means, in plain English, more likely than not. As to count one, that alleges that the defendant violated condition 4.18 on or about September 24th with regard to Alexandra Moffitt. Condition 4.18 prohibits any assault of abusive, threatening, or intimidating behavior. And the defendant has focused on the fact that he says he did not assault Ms. Moffitt. I find more likely than not that he engaged in some sort of assaultive, threatening, intimidating, or abusive behavior. By his own words, he told me that he grabbed her to get the car key back. He didn't say I grabbed her to prevent her from hitting me again. He said I grabbed her to get the car key back. And then he said he walked after her to get the car key back. And then he said to the prosecutor during cross that the way he was going to do it was to physically grab the key from her. If this were an assault trial, it would be a whole different story. But it's not an assault trial. Mr. Guild is on probation. He can't do what everybody else can do necessarily. That's why his agent was explaining that, you can't, even if you're the victim, you'll be ordered not to have contact with someone, because we don't want people in that kind of a situation where they can easily go into some kind of assaultive, abusive, threatening, or intimidating behavior. And that's what I find happened here. Even if Mr. Gill did not strike Ms. Moffitt or cause an injury to Ms. Moffitt, he nevertheless engaged in the prohibited behavior in condition 4.18. With regard to count 2, I agree that it's not a strict liability kind of thing. There has to be shown that there was some knowledge on the part of the defendant that Ms. Moffitt was a convicted felon, and I'm not satisfied that that's been shown. And with respect to count 3, contact with Alexandra Moffitt after having been given a direct order, the defendant simply says that he wasn't given a direct order, and then says that he could have been, but he forgot. And I find Agent Spears' testimony to be quite credible in that regard, and that he was given a direct order not to have contact with Ms. Moffitt. So I find the defendant guilty on counts 1 and 3, not guilty on count 2. And are we proceeding to sentencing Agent Spear? Is that what you were recommending, or?
Thank you, Your Honor. I really don't know what to do in these, sometimes with these cases. They're so difficult. And from what I've seen of Mr. Guild in the time that I've been supervising him, he had been at Eaton County Jail for an incident that happened prior to probation, but his sentence went into this probation, kind of overlapped a bit. He's had a case in 55th District Court against Heather Corkwell for stalking that was dismissed. And now he's back with 2 incidences intimidating another person. He is not doing well. He does well with looking for work. He does well for being polite. He's a likable person. But when he gets involved with certain people, or any people from what I've seen, he just appears to be so possessive to the point where he has to have something to do with these girls at all costs. And that's the dangerous part of being on probation, the preponderance of the evidence like this instead of what the other courts have for a burden. My suggestion is to have 90 days jail, suspended upon entry into the domestic violence program at TRICAP. Obviously, he didn't learn anything from PATS in the outpatient setting. And I'm thinking that maybe he'll have an opportunity to really look into his life and try to grasp the concept where he needs to avoid these situations, because something's going to happen where he's going to end up with worse charges, and eventually it's going to lead to something far more punitive than probation.
Thank you. Mr. Austin?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. I'm certainly going to request that the court continue Mr. Guild on probation. I can understand the recommendation. I would just ask if possible, if it could be an outpatient setting as opposed to an inpatient setting. I know why Agent Spear is making that recommendation, but I know Mr. Guild is concerned. He has a baby on the way, and he wants to be out there for that and to work and be able to support for his family in that way. So I would ask the court to take that into consideration.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Guild, anything you wanted to say?
Not this time, Your Honor.
Okay. Well, I think Agent Spear is correct in that there's a lot of good things about you. He says that, you know, you're good at looking for work, you're polite. I can definitely attest to that. You seem like a polite enough young man, but this behavior has got to change. This is not acceptable behavior. If you have an argument with a woman over a car and car payments, when you're not on probation, maybe you have the liberty to deal with that a different way. But when you're on probation and you have to avoid those kinds of contentious situations, you don't have the liberty to deal with things the way that other people can. So, I think that there has to be more drastic action taken here in order to address this kind of behavior. Because in the end, we want you to succeed because you've got positive characteristics that tell us that you can succeed on probation. So I'm going to continue you on probation and sentence you to 90 days in jail. Can someone tell me how long he's been in on the bench warrant?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I'll look that up really quick.
Perhaps 12 days, Your Honor. I think Mr.
Sounds
Gill
about right.
picked up on the 8th. That would be 12 days.
And we're thinking 12 days, Agent Spear, does that sound right?
That does.
Okay, 90 days in jail, credit for 12 days served, the bench warrant is dismissed, and I'll suspend the balance of the time upon successful entry into and completion of the domestic violence program at TRICAP, and Mr. Gill will be transported to TRICAP at the discretion of the sheriff, and all other terms and conditions of probation will continue to apply. Anything else, Mr. Austin?
Nothing further back, Mr. Gill, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, then that will conclude this